Hello and welcome to The Big Picture. The just concluded visit to China by Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh, his first after 5 years and last before the end of the term of UPA 2, has received a lot of attention. The meetings with the President and Prime Minister of China, seen as full of goodwill and bonhomie, and the subsequent agreements in the joint statement indicated some freshness to the relationship. Even skeptics feel that the border defense cooperation agreement signed between the two countries are seen as important. The focus on maintaining peace and tranquility on the borders and focusing on the economic and other areas and improving the people-to-people relations were highlighted during the talks and in the statements. Today we will look at what this visit of Prime Minister Dr. Manmohan Singh to China means and if it has taken the relationship forward and what it means for the future. To discuss this, I have with me Dr. Srikanth Kondapalii, Professor in Chinese Studies at the JNU, M.K. Bhadrakumar, former Ambassador, Lieutenant General Raj Kadyan, retired Vice Chief of the Army Staff, and Anand Sahay, Coordinating Editor, Asian Age. Welcome to all of you. Mr. Kondapalii, you were one of the skeptics before the start of this visit. You didn't have too many hopes about this relationship. You in your writings and all were quite skeptical about it. At the end of it, after seeing what has happened, all these numerous agreements signed, especially the defense border agreement, you think that the relationship has improved a little bit? Do you think that the visit of Prime Minister has been useful?
Obviously, I think every visit by the Prime Minister to another neighboring country will have some deliverables. In this case, 9 agreements which were signed, including the BDCA, Border Defense Cooperation Agreement, the Sister Cities Agreement, the river water, transboundary river water issues. Then we have the road construction, infrastructure related ones, and the other. I think these are positive. I was mentioning in some of the writings that preceding the visit, we have seen that US-China relations were the focus of Chinese foreign policy. And we have not seen any indication except for some lip service towards the emerging countries or towards the developing countries or towards the neighbors as far as China is concerned. So that was the argument that I was trying to put across. And on the BDCA, if you carefully look at the document, there has been a lot of reiteration of the 1993, 96, 2005 agreements between the two sides. The fresh ones were obviously that they will not tail each other, right, the patrols from either side. Secondly, in terms of a hotline between the military headquarters between the two, and a few more details in terms of the contacts at the sector level across the line of actual control. Barring these, most of these are repetitive from the 93 or 96 or 2005 agreements. But it still provides for a psychological cushion for either side, and the fact that they have initiated further these mechanisms indicated, number one, that we will, in case of crisis, the crisis management institutions will come up to restore order on the line of actual control. Secondly, the hotlines would probably work to de-escalate tensions between the two sides. Those were the indicators, and I think it's positive.
It's positive. Mr. Bhadrakumar, there's one statement in the Prime Minister's statement. There's one thing which he says that that the two countries should not bother too much or concern itself too much about the relationship which it has with other countries. In what context do you think the Prime Minister is talking about it, and is there similar reciprocation from the Chinese side?
You see, certainly the Prime Minister, if what you have in mind is the Prime Minister was referring to Pakistan, that was not the case, because there are the briefings given by senior officials who have travelled with him gives us the impression that Prime Minister took up very strongly and very clearly India's deep concerns about the nuclear cooperation that is there with Pakistan, and also the Chinese activities in Pakistan-occupied Kashmir. But generally, you see, there is a certain international environment There is, on the one hand, there is a competition come cooperation between the United States and China. India is now, we have called openly one of the closest partners of the United States after Prime Minister's visit. So, you know, how these things, the interplay of this, you know, is what is under reference here in the expression that you have cited. I think the Chinese may have a concern, possibly, that India might get drawn into the pivot to Asia as part of any kind of containment strategy, which has never been an Indian agenda. India has,
but it is. Don't you think it is American agenda to have India as one of the buffer between China and at least that is what we keep talking about, we keep hearing about.
You see,
that causes concern to China.
You see, the American agenda is definitely to negotiate as optimally as possible with China, and everything else is going into that. It's not for using anyone against China, or it's not for propping up anyone as a counterweight to China, but to create negotiating space vis-a-vis China. So, to the extent that there are differences and there are disputes in India-China relationship, it's not a normal, close, friendly relationship between two neighbors as it ought to have been. Because of that, there is a certain kind of energy that can produce a strong US-Indian relationship in the Asian environment. That is what is here, and Chinese would probably... Yes.
Sorry, you think that Prime Minister was referring to that, telling China that, you know, don't get too concerned about our relations with US.
You see, it's not only China. I think even Russians, you know, had misgivings about the defense initiative, the statement which was issued in Washington. Chinese would definitely have, because they certainly look with a microscope at any such thing involving the United States in the Asian continent. So they certainly will have, I mean, it stands to reason that they would have misgivings, and Prime Minister would have been giving that assurance. And similarly, we would also expect that China has a reciprocal attitude, you know, towards our sensitivities. You know, Pakistan is a very sensitive relationship for India, and whatever China builds up with Pakistan, if it has an India-centric content, it's of concern to India.
Absolutely. You know. Lieutenant General Kadyan, this border defense cooperation agreement, Dr. Kondapalii says that much of it is what was there in the past, 93 to 2005 agreements. But do you see any forward movement? Do you see it as anything significant as far as the two armies are concerned, two defense forces are concerned?
Yes,
and at the line of actual control, what difference would it make?
There is certainly a movement forward. I mean, those 93, 96 and 2005 protocols have been taken a step forward.
Right.
We had a very unfortunate incident in Depsang
recently
in the month of April, May, which caused a lot of tension, and of course, some of it was media hype, but there was tension on the deployment side. So some of that would be taken care of. Another concern
so Depsangs will become rarer now.
They have said that first they should seek clarification from each other if there is a doubt. Secondly, the flag meeting should increase number, that is the local commanders.
Right.
Then the next level of commanders, brigadiers, so far we had 3 points of contact.
Yes.
One in Ladakh, one in Sikkim, and the other in Arunachal. Now they are opening two more. One in Himachal and one in eastern Arunachal.
Yes.
Then the Chinese region commanders, Lengdu and Shanzhou, will meet our northern and eastern army commander, that contact. Plus the meetings with the defense ministry officials and the annual defense meetings, the agenda or whatever they call, that will improve. Then of course exercises and meeting of troops, joining them in festivities. This contact between soldiers obviously will improve. The other point which is significant, which I noticed, is that so far there was the apprehension that Chinese are concerned about our developing roads or airports in the border areas. But there they have clarified that there is no restriction on our building infrastructure or what they call asymmetrical deployment. You can deploy it as much as you want where, so can they, I suppose. So that's certainly a very positive movement, and I'm sure we should be able to reduce, if not totally avoid, some kind of incidents in future.
And tensions on the border.
And yeah, naturally,
The tensions will, you think will get reduced by this agreement which has been signed?
Yes, yes. Not tailing is another
Not
thing
tailing,
that has
yes.
come about.
Yes.
That if a patrol is moving in what we call no
What
man
is this? Please explain this to the common viewer. What is this tailing
See,
and not tailing?
what used to happen if you see a Chinese patrol moving, you would send your patrol behind it to see where it goes and what it does.
Right.
That is called tailing.
Right.
So they're always at attention. If
Yes.
soldiers are moving close to each other, we saw some TV snippet some time back when they were actually physically jostling.
Yeah.
So that kind of situation will be avoided.
So the tailing will not be done now.
It should not be done. It should not be done, hopefully. You must also realize that is the 4,000 kilometers unmarked border.
Right.
There are no landmarks there. It's like a desert in high altitude. So where exactly the line runs is always a problem. Sometimes there are genuine mistakes on both sides. Sometimes, of course, there is a deliberate attempt to intrude into the other territory for certain reasons. But that hopefully will improve. It's
Okay.
a step forward.
Anand, Ambassador Bhadrakumar was talking about reciprocity as far as China is concerned. Do you see that reciprocity in these meetings about what the Prime Minister said about these relations with other countries?
So I agree with much of what Mr. Bhadrakumar said, and I also happen to agree with what Professor Kondapalii said earlier. On the whole, I think the China is one of our most important bilateral relationships. It's a very, very major power. It's a P5 power on your doorsteps, with whom we've had very difficult ties, with whom we have an unsettled border, and so on. And yet, there's always been an effort in the last, say, decade and a half, to try and carry on in all fields, pending the settlement of the dispute. When we look at all this overall, the Prime Minister going there and this defense cooperation agreement, border cooperation agreement coming about, is on the whole a good thing, a decent step, because for the lack of it, something was not exactly as the Chinese wanted, let's say, on the border. They had been urging us to get something right from the beginning of this year onward, and we were, from what I have heard, we were taking a bit too long in arriving at all this. But having said all of this, I should also like to say that we can't be jumping up and down for joy, or going to deep despondence about what has happened or what you could not achieve. We can't do either of these things. When initially this peace and tranquility on the border, 93, 96, all these things happened, that was a different world dynamics at that time.
Right.
There was a different correlation of forces as far as China itself is concerned in looking at its neighbors and looking at the world. Today, China is a far more influential power than then. That signature that was made in those days, it served you very well for a fairly long period of time. And then suddenly, Depsang was a particularly unhappy episode because the Chinese PM was about to arrive. In fact, in South Africa, the Chinese had said that please make some room, adjust your schedules for our Prime Minister. And we did all that, and then suddenly...
This happens.
No, I don't believe it is fortuitous. So what I'm trying to say to you is that you may have this agreement on the ground. This is, if you like, an effort to invigorate the process which commenced in 93, 96, right? But this does not necessarily mean that because we've signed this agreement, we'll be freed up completely of the tensions of the kind that we saw in Depsang. It may not take that shape and form, you see. But even when the Depsang incident occurred, I do think that the Chinese, military on the ground, patrolling the border and so on, they would have, the soldier on the ground would not ring up the Central Military Commission, obviously not, But the path that whole thing would take would have the, how to go broadly forward, or how to deal with the situation, would be decided even at that time at high levels.
But Anand, my question was that about the reciprocity. You see that kind of reciprocity, the goodwill which our Prime Minister was trying to express to the Chinese. Do you see that reciprocated?
Well, I mean, I think we express goodwill. Of course, they would also express goodwill, and I completely agree with the way Bhadrakumar put it, that the US is trying to optimize its negotiating space, right? It's not a question that they would like your military convoys to be alongside their convoys facing the Chinese. That's hardly the point.
Right.
But goodwill expression, yes, and I'm sure some negative, positive things will happen. But since the border is unsettled, try and bring about peace to the extent you can in other areas. I was a bit disappointed on the economic side.
No,
on the deficit, trade deficit side, helping us to
Dr.
scale that
Kondapalii,
down.
the economic side, one of the things, Prime Minister repeatedly in many of the conversations and statements which we have seen, and even in the press conference, he repeatedly spoke about the, adverse balance of payment situation as far as India and China is concerned, and the need for China to invest in India. You see those, they're talking of China industrial zone and things like that. You think these are things which can happen in the near future? And what about this BCIM corridor?
Well, to first mention about the reciprocity
Yes.
between, I thought the Prime Minister's speech was brilliant when after he met with Premier Li Keqiang. He said, as leaders of the emerging economies, we have a strategic vision.
And that statement that when India and China shakes hands, the world watches.
Yeah. The second part, he mentioned that the strategic benchmark is the peace and tranquility and maintaining stability and so on.
Right.
Third one was that we give a strategic reassurance to China that our relations with a third party will not have an impact on China. We didn't see China making a very explicit reciprocal statement regarding this. Of course, there have been several statements before that China's relations with other countries will not be against a third party. More as a rhetorical kind, it has been mentioned by most states actually in the international system, not just the Chinese. But what we have seen is we have not seen a explicit reciprocal statement from China in the similar way as Prime Minister Manmohan Singh had said.
Is that a cause for concern? Would you say that as a cause for concern, or is it in the nature of the Chinese to behave the way they do?
Well, if China being second largest economy and with 3 times the economy of India and 3 times the defense budget of India, if China would have made that statement, I think the comfort levels in New Delhi would have been higher. So a larger neighbor, larger power, saying such statements would be more conducive in New Delhi. On the trade deficit, there is this agreement on the infrastructure development project, especially in roads, and then there is a power sector, services issues and so on, which is a huge kind of forward momentum in the India-China economic relations these days, with nearly 80,000 megawatts of equipment coming from 60,000 megawatts. Out of nearly 3 lakh megawatt that we needed, 60 is coming from China. So it's a huge, so there is a kind of forward momentum on this as well, but not very substantial. However, when Premier Li Keqiang visited in May, there's the idea of industrial parks and the railway stations and railway projects and so on. These were mentioned. I think it will take some time for setting up these industrial parks. Also, given the Indian context, where land acquisition is a problem, a host of other issues are problematic. So we will go by our own pace in setting up these industrial parks. I don't see an immediate fix towards the trade deficit. Last year we had a $23 billion deficit. This year about $30 billion is what we expect. I don't think there is in the short to medium term this trade deficit is going to be reduced.
The deficit.
On the other hand, we also have not seen much Chinese investment except in project works. $244 million is what the Chinese investment in India is. I think it's quite shameful for a country which has $3.2 trillion of foreign exchange reserves and so on.
Ambassador Bhadrakumar, on the economic front, where do you see it going? You think that this as he says that this deficit is not going to be bridged in a hurry, but some of the things which were discussed and which have been decided, you think is there a possibility of that taking a faster pace?
Certainly, at the broadest level, the approach is that our emphasis is really to get more Chinese investment and to be part of what is happening now in the Asian continent as an emerging power. So for that, we need peace and tranquility on the border, and we don't want irritants to come up. So the approach is very clear. Now here I agree with what Dr. Kondapalii said, that the only way that we can address this question of deficit is in terms of getting Chinese investments here.
Why has it not been coming so far, and why do you think it will come now?
Well, frankly, we ourselves have put a lot of roadblocks.
Exactly.
It's not a question that China has got, trillions of dollars worth of reserves and why it is not coming. When our Prime Minister was in Beijing, Russia signed an agreement, Rosneft signed an agreement with China for supply of another 200,000 barrels of oil per day over a 10-year period to China on the basis of a prepaid deal. China paid upfront cash for the 10-year deal, and what was the amount? 85 billion. So China can do that, and China will do that
But
also.
there has always been security concerns expressed here as far as Chinese investments are
It is a security concern. I come from Trivandrum. Now there is a port called Vizhinjam, where even our defense minister criticized the Indian decision at that time.
Right.
When he was not yet, I think, the defense minister. Chinese won the tender, but immediately there was a hue and cry here. This is a fishing port. And it's a very beautiful natural harbor and a fantastic container terminal, it could have been. But because it was a Chinese company which won the tender, we said no. Now 6 years have passed. We are still at square one. And we are still, working on another tender and all the rest of it, I don't know. Meanwhile, Hambantota has come up in Sri Lanka.
Right.
So you see, this is what is happening. We are paranoid about Chinese investments, and we put all kinds of roadblocks on it. I think we should also have a greater amount of self-confidence in that. After all, a country like Malaysia, which has got also a maritime dispute with China, now they are thinking about multiplying the trade volume by 3 times to $170 billion by 2017, in the next 3 years' time. So in the last 2 weeks, when the Chinese leadership was traveling in the Southeast Asian area, even Vietnam, is moving forward on the economic side with all and Vietnam has a much more complicated relationship with China than India had. We had only one war. Vietnam had several in their history with China. And all the time, the northern aggression was something which has, been a part of their national life. But on the economic side, it's a no-holds-barred kind of approach. Move forward everywhere, including, in sectors, where there is this kind of what we call the security. When Chancellor Osborne went from the United Kingdom, he invited China to take stakes in the nuclear power stations in Britain. So, aren't these countries which are worried about China's rise? Australia is another country which is doing it. So, I think we should have a certain kind of a change in our mindset. Then I think we'll get more investment from China.
General Kadyan, you think that the security concerns, partly the defense forces have also been responsible. You are the defense forces have always been raising this.
Let me put in one thing. I don't think it is so much the defense ministry.
No, not the defense ministry. I'm talking about general atmosphere in the border and things like that. That also adds to the paranoia about the security concerns. You think that the Indian defense establishment has less concerns about security than the intelligence establishment or others?
No, I think the concern is there, but the procedures are so complicated. For example, when you want to raise a mountain core, he said initially it will take 5 years for us to get the equipment. Now you find that the transport aircraft requires run into some kind of a problem. So that willy-nilly gives the impression that their priorities are not right.
Right.
But that may not be so. I think we need to sort out our procedures. I don't think there is a fault with the policy or with their designs or with their desires. But it is our mechanism is too sluggish, too complicated. Whatever we want to import, weaponry, firstly, we have a problem that we can't produce indigenously still. 70% has to come from abroad. Then the procedure is in everything there is a scam, so the whole thing gets stalled. That is where we need to focus on. Some kind of a fast-track acquisition process needs to be worked out. And we shouldn't be paranoid about not a pie going into a wrong pocket.
Okay. Anyway, Anand, this BCIM, very quickly actually, we are running out of time, reviving the Silk Route. You think this is a fantasy, or you think it can become a reality?
Nothing is a fantasy. I think nothing is a fantasy, but I think it will take its own time. Desirable, of course, desirable. I think on the whole, any economic push is a good idea. Though I'm not in a position to make any judgment about security factor vis-a-vis your economic factor. Of course, we need the investments, but certain areas should be not. Honestly, I can't I don't know what exactly to say on that. But I mean, only a few years ago, we saw the case of a very major Dubai firm, which was not given permission by the Americans, port development related, though they had, all the credentials and they had backed the contract almost. Security was cited. I mean, in the case of the British nuclear industry, perhaps Osborne invited him. I don't know. They must be quite sure. Now, in our case, I honestly do not have any expertise of that kind to make any assessment. But barring very, very delicate, sensitive areas, Chinese investment is absolutely, they should be more than welcome.
Chinese investment.
But equally, I would say that Indian software services, there has been some sense of grievance that non-tariff barriers, etc., are being placed in their path. And maybe it was on account of the psychological setting which has been there in recent times, maybe some other consideration. But let's try to, both sides should try to work on, in that field as well.
Very quickly, both of you think this BCIM, reviving the Silk Route and things like that, is something which is a good idea, which you think will be taken forward at all? What are the major hurdles?
I think China has a huge project vis-a-vis the ASEAN region. High-speed trains, the maritime Silk Road and all that we have talked about. So, without India, they are going to go ahead. And it will come through Myanmar and, it will go and it will possibly even come into Bangladesh. From southern Myanmar,
yes.
Without India. So I think it makes eminent sense for India to be part of it and to rethink, whatever reservations we've had. Obviously, we've been dragging our feet.
Right.
I think it is time to have a rethink. Now, see, for example, we didn't discuss here this river water thing. I think it has been a very, very big outcome of the visit, which we need to take note of, because that also shows a Chinese attitude, to solving problems with India, to form a group which our Prime Minister had asked President Xi whether we could have one. Not only that, and they have actually, the wording shows from what I see, they recognize the right to the riparian states. Now, this is something I believe, as per the reports,
yes,
that they have never stated in black and white with any other country. So they've done it with India. So there is an attitude. So I think in the light of all this, to come back to the subject which you mentioned, I think it is time to rethink. I think we should move forward with China and on investment-related regulations and policies which we had on this road through Myanmar. All this we need to rethink. I think because let me sum it up this way, that I think the outcome of the visit is highly satisfactory. It's been an excellent visit. And it has created a new momentum for the relationship and a new sense of direction.
Okay, I think on that very positive note, we need to end. We completely run out of time. It has been a positive visit and positive outcomes. So we'll wait and watch how it will progress in the near future and also in the distant future. Thanks to all my guests, Dr. Srikanth Kondapalii, Mr. Bhadrakumar, Lieutenant General Raj Kadyan and Anand Sahay. Please keep watching. We'll come back with another issue in Big Picture, same time tomorrow.